Buddy, probably be asked to accept that. And what I'd like to do, and I'll take a little note down that says to hit the record button. I'd like to introduce Brian Stewart with Electrify now. And as you saw on the flyer, Brian was the Vice President of Sustainability at Nike. Retired, what, 5 years ago or so, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Four.
And I'll let Brian fill in his transition from Nike to Electrify now, but it was sort of an interesting story that he can share. And what I'd like is if everybody could turn off, except for Brian, turn off your microphone so that you mute yourself so that we don't have backgrounds or dogs or things like that. I'd also suggest for that you stop your video, which helps with the bandwidth and all. And because it's recording, if you don't turn off your video, you will be memorialized whenever anybody sees the video. Now I'm going to set it so that it will be, my recording should be, if I get it right here, with just Brian as the speaker, so that when we get started, it'll be focusing on him and we won't have distractions such as me. So with that, Brian, take it away.
Great. Let me just set one other thing up here. Sorry. All right. Well, thanks everybody for showing up tonight, and thanks for the introduction, Bill. My name is Brian Stewart. Like Bill said, I retired from Nike about 4 years ago. I was Vice President of Corporate Sustainability there, focused on innovation. And when I left, I was really interested in the topic. I've always been interested in the topic of what individuals can do to help fight climate change. And I had time to dig into it in a little bit more than I had when I was working. And I was blown away by all this optimistic information I was able to uncover, but I was also frustrated at just the lack of good information that was available, particularly to homeowners or pretty much anybody who's an energy consumer or just a person, in terms of the really powerful things that we can do to fight climate change. But also, I think the thing that really hit me the more I dove into this was that the issue that we have really is not about all of us changing our behavior and living smaller lives and depriving ourselves of fundamentally important things. It's really about how we change our systems. And the two big ones are our energy system, and the food system is the other one. We won't talk so much about our food system today, but that's another one I'm really interested in, because there's a lot of we won't get where we want to get until we change those systems. But today we're going to be mostly talking about the energy system. And so I like to start pretty high level with this conversation, because most people have a pretty good idea that carbon emissions are overheating the earth, but very few people have a good idea of where those emissions really come from. And so what I like to do is start with information about carbon emissions and their sources. And this is information from the United States. It's from the US EPA. But if you look at this type of data from any country in the world, it's going to be extremely similar to this. It will vary slightly from country to country, but not significantly. And what you see is that the vast majority of the emissions that we produce on the globe really come from energy, and specifically from burning fossil fuels for these three things: electricity, transportation, and heat, which, it's hard to imagine living without those things. And the truth is there's a lot of people that don't have reliable access to them now in some countries of the earth that should. So it's not about using less of this, although of course we don't want to be wasteful. It's really more about where we get that energy from. Of course, there's some emissions from agriculture. You hear a lot about that. And in some countries it's bigger than 10%, but this is the United States number. And it just is dwarfed by energy. And then of course, when you look at this at the household level, it's a similar story, that the vast majority of the emissions that we're responsible for as individuals comes from the energy that we consume. And think of it as the energy we purchase. This is the direct energy that you're essentially buying with your electricity bill, with your gasoline that you pump into your cars, and with your natural gas or propane if you're using that to heat. Of course, there's emissions associated with the products that we buy and the food that we eat. But the truth is, if you really work hard, you can chip away and slightly reduce your emissions from the things you buy. You can buy fewer things. You can buy things that are made locally, including food that's organically grown or regeneratively grown if it's possible, and that's grown nearby. Those will reduce these emissions from these two boxes. But this big one, this big blue box, is 60% of the energy of your footprint that's from energy. It's entirely possible to reduce that to zero, eliminate it, have it go away, not just reduce it, have it go away. We've done it in our home. We've helped hundreds of people across Oregon and the United States to do the same. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So the bad news is that, these fossil fuels come from burning, the emissions come from burning coal and natural gas to produce electricity, gasoline and diesel for transportation, and natural gas and propane for heating. And the bad news is we have to stop burning those things, like completely, not just reduce, but we have to stop burning fossil fuels. This is where it starts to get more optimistic, though, which is that the wind and solar are now the lowest cost sources of new energy generation. And this is happening all over the world. The prices for solar and wind have plummeted over the last decades. They're projected to fall even further. They're now lower than any other source. And what we're seeing right now is that gas prices and coal prices are going up. So at the same time that solar and wind prices are going down. So you have this undercutting of the cost for energy, which is happening with renewables, and it's happening all over the globe. The other thing that's happening is that battery prices are plummeting along that same kind of curve as they scale up. And so now that means that EVs will be cheaper. They already are cheaper. From the studies that I've been doing, you can see that they're already lower cost now than they were even just a few years ago. And this is really important news, particularly for energy storage, for getting to 100% renewable energy grid, because we'll need some forms of storage, including the storage from batteries. The other thing that's been happening that some of you may have been noticing, but it happens gradually, so it isn't quite as shocking to note, is that electric appliances have just gotten dramatically more efficient, energy efficient, over the last 2 decades. The LED light bulb is sort of the poster child for that, because it's literally 10 times more efficient than an incandescent bulb. The same has been happening with our refrigerators and our computers and our phones and anything, televisions, anything that uses electricity uses far less of it now than it did even 5 or 10 years ago. So you couple these insane efficiency improvements with electric appliances. And by the way, those efficiency improvements have not been happening with gas burning devices. Furnaces are only single digits more energy efficient today than they were 50 years ago, with the standards that have barely changed. And the fleet of gasoline powered vehicles in the United States has only improved overall fleet efficiency by a handful, like a couple of miles per gallon. It's literally flat over 30 or more years. So these efficiency gains have been happening with electric appliances, but not with gas appliances. And the grid has just been getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, because we've been retiring coal and because of renewables becoming more and more available and scaling up. So when you combine all these things, efficient devices, cheap and clean electricity, it's hard to avoid this conclusion that we should be electrifying everything. And you'll hear this terminology often being used as one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful tool we have to fight climate change. And it's conjuring up this idea of a sustainable future where we have this new energy system, which is powered by the wind and the sun, and we're getting all of our primary energy needs from that for electricity, for transportation and heat. It's an amazingly optimistic story, because along with cheaper and more available and abundant energy that is not overheating the earth, we also get cleaner air. Because where does air pollution come from? It comes from burning fossil fuels almost exclusively. We'll get cleaner water and more available water. The estimates about how much water is used for fossil fuels production and generation is range from 10% to as high as 40% of available fresh water. So more water, we'll have a stronger economy with better jobs that are safer and higher paying. And we'll have more equal access to energy. So a lot of what we're seeing right now with the war in Ukraine, for example, which is to some degree an outcome of this unequal distribution of access to petroleum and fossil fuels, which leads to levels of corruption that are just staggering at the corporate level as well as the state level. And there is a much more equal access to energy because literally the wind and sun hits every part of the globe, and way more of it than we could ever consume. So that's all the good news. There is, however, this stark reality that every single device that burns fossil fuels that we currently have around the globe has to be replaced by a clean energy alternative before 2050. 2050 is the date when scientists say we need to be carbon neutral and begin to actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so that gives us roughly 30 years to get rid of literally thousands and thousands of coal and gas-fired electric plants, power plants, hundreds of millions of automobiles and trucks, millions of gas furnaces and boilers and water heaters, all these devices that currently burn fossil fuels and which produce the lion's share of the emissions that are overheating the planet. So it's daunting to think about all these transactions that have to happen. But on the other hand, we've got 30 years, so it doesn't have to happen overnight. And within the time we've got, for the most part, all these available and existing devices that burn fossil fuels will come up against the end of their useful life. So there is a retirement schedule for every one of these things. Gas power plants obviously are the longest ones, but cars get retired, every 10 or 12 years. And there's transactions that happen much more quickly than that for other devices. So we have the potent solutions right here. They're ready today. They're cost effective. They're ready to scale, and they eliminate carbon emissions. They don't just reduce it. And that is wind and solar, like we talked about. Electric vehicles, whether that's for your personal transportation or for shipping, they're beginning to show up all over the place. And electric heat pumps that work for, we'll talk more about this, for residential heating, but also for commercial buildings as a way to completely eliminate our reliance on natural gas. The problem is that all of these solutions, while they're ready to scale, and most of them have existed for decades, here in the United States, they have relatively low market share. So what has to happen is we have to go through this amazing transition where we're moving away from fossil fuels devices and embracing these clean renewables. And that's why all of us have a role to play in this, which we'll talk more about, because every time that we retire one of our gas burning devices, our fossil fuels burning devices, and replace it with an electric device that's being charged with renewable energy, we are helping to build this new energy system that will be the most important part of a sustainable future for humanity. So this idea of this combination of renewable energy and electrification is super powerful, and it doesn't just reduce emissions, it eliminates them when they're used in conjunction. One of the best ways to understand this is to think of our own homes. And so if you think about the four largest sources of emissions for a home, first of all, it's electricity, and it's a different situation for you there with Coos Curry Electric, but on average, and we'll talk about that, but the average Oregon household produces somewhere between 3.5 and 5.5 tons of carbon emissions every year just from the electricity they consume. One automobile, 4 to 8 tons, depending how big it is and how much you drive it, of course. A gas furnace, somewhere between 4 and 8, and a gas water heater between 1 and 3. These are the four largest energy consumers and carbon emission sources in anyone's life. And if you do a really good job of reducing, like trying to be smart about using less electricity, turn the lights off, drive your car slower, get a car that's most fuel efficient you can get, drive less, turn your thermostat down, maybe take cold showers even, you might, with all these efficiency strategies, reduce your carbon emissions by 20% if you really work hard at it and deprive yourself of a lot of things that you take for granted today. On the other hand, if you can take these renewable energy and electrification strategies that we're talking about, you can get 100% renewable electricity. So instead of 3 to 5 tons, you're talking about 0 tons per year for electricity. There's lots of ways to do this for most people in Oregon. We'll talk more about this. An EV that's charged with that renewable electricity. Most people charge their EVs at home, by the way. 0 tons of emissions per year instead of 4 to 8. A heat pump that's also being powered by renewable energy, 0 emissions per year instead of 4 to 8. And a water heater, a heat pump water heater, 0. So instead of, a typical home, which produces 20 to 30 tons of carbon emissions per year, when you employ these renewable energy and efficient and electrification strategies, you can eliminate those emissions. They can go to 0. And again, we've done this in our home, and many people around the state are doing this. We're trying to help people to do this, partly by helping to understand the power of it, but also to help them understand that you'll save money when you do this. Of course, there's the transactions involved. You have to buy these expensive new things, but furnaces break, water heaters break, cars wear out. So when the time comes to replace your furnace or your water heater or get a new car, it's really important that people like us are thinking about how amazing these alternatives are. And once you've done that, your annual utility and energy bills will go down. This was before all gas prices have gone up. It's probably more like it's probably closer to $5,000 per year, actually, for now the gas prices and gasoline prices are going up for this number on the left. But regardless, you're going to save thousands of dollars by taking these actions that we'll be talking about. So renewable energy plus electrification is super powerful combination. It allows us to live in homes that are safer and actually more comfortable, which we'll talk more about. We can spend our energy dollars on the solution rather than spending our energy dollars on the problem. That $4,000 we were talking about in that last slide, what is that going for? Your electric bill, a lot of that is buying fossil fuels for power. Of course, your natural gas bill and your gasoline you put in car, that's all fossil fuel. So essentially that $4,000 that most of us are spending per year on energy is essentially paying for climate change. And you could use your energy dollars to pay for the solution instead, funding renewable energy, funding heat pumps, funding EVs, et cetera. And that's what we'll be talking about. So that's why it's really exciting to think about these options. And the thing that all of us can do as individuals by, first of all, being aware of these things, talking about them with your friends and neighbors, and then embracing these solutions when it's time for you in your life, is all of us can help to make these solutions more the new normal, which is happening, but needs to happen really fast. All right, so Electrify, now we talk about doing this. We try to break it down into 3 steps in your own life, which is clean up your electric supply, electrify your home, then electrify your ride, your transportation. And of course, we need policies to bring everyone along on this journey with us. We can't just let that happen with those who can and leave people behind and let them be stuck with even higher energy bills and all the burdens of fossil fuels. So let's start with talk about how we do this one at a time, clean up your electric supply being one of the most important things to do. I want to give you a little bit of a picture of what it's like statewide and also what it's specifically like for you there in Brookings and on the South Coast. It's quite different, but here in the United States, 25% of carbon emissions come from generating electricity. In Oregon, we get our electricity from lots of different sources, including coal, gas, wind, solar, and hydro. And so if you look at the different utilities, it's very different from utility to utility in terms of how much a typical home would produce from their electricity in terms of carbon emissions. Pacific Power is the worst. They're the dirtiest source of electricity in the state. And a typical home is going to produce 5 to 7 tons just by the electricity they consume. PGE is cleaner. It's more like the state average, 3 to 5. Eugene Water and Electric, just to the north of you, is cleaner still, with more like half a ton. It's about a tenth of what Portland is. But with Coos Curry Electric, where you are, you get really clean electricity because it's almost exclusively from hydro. And so your electricity is clean. I love this view right here because it kind of shows where we were with Pacific Power. This is what the state average looked like a few years ago. Portland General Electric is very close to what our statewide average is now. And then Eugene and Coos-Curry, this is where we're going because of the laws and all the new renewals that are coming online. It's possible for most people, it's a little different for you guys in Coos-Curry, but most people have, if you belong to Pacific Power or PG, you can get a green power plan, which will do a lot to clean up your electric supply. All of us, although I understand it's harder for you there in Brookings, can put rooftop solar on our homes. It can be really helpful. And in some areas, community solar is available. So it's important for you guys to know about this, even though like in your situation, it might not be as relevant, but it's possible for nearly everyone in the state to power their life with clean renewable energy right now by taking one of these steps. And then of course, Oregon as a statewide, we're headed towards 100% clean energy by 2040 because of the laws that passed last year. And that means that Coos-Curry electricity will get even cleaner than it is today. But I think it's bottom line is you should feel very confident that essentially anything that you plug into your sockets there in Brookings or in the Coos-Curry electric zone will produce very few carbon emissions. So that's great because now you can use that as a way of powering your life with other devices. Okay, so that's to clean up your electric supply. And it's one of the most important things that people can do. And it's one of the easiest. But after that, we have to start thinking about our homes and all the fossil fuels that we burn in our homes. And I invite you to think about all the devices you have in your home that burn fossil fuels. One of the biggest culprits in our homes is methane gas. And that is a very common source of heating across Oregon. But it's not the clean fuel that's advertised. It's accounts for another 25% of the carbon emissions countrywide here. The natural gas we burn for heating. This is not the same natural. This is different accounting than the gas we're using to produce electricity. This is just the gas that's being used for heating. That would include propane, although propane is obviously a much smaller portion of the whole. It's also a major source of indoor and outdoor air pollution. A lot of people just don't associate natural gas and methane or propane with air pollution, but it's one of the largest sources of smog and air pollution externally, but also a major source indoors, which we'll talk about. And propane is essentially, for all intents and purposes, identical to methane in terms of what it does. It's more expensive because of the way that it's produced and the way that it's distributed. So for you as a cost there in Brookings or in the South Coast, if anyone is using propane, it's an expensive way to heat your home, but it has all the same negative climate attributes that methane has. And the more that we learn about methane and how much leakage happens throughout the system from extracting it from the fracking fields, pumping it across the country and refining it, essentially, even getting into our homes, there's immense amounts of leakage, which increase the global warming potential of this gas even further because it's much worse unburned than burned. And so the more we learn about this, the more we realize that methane is not really significantly cleaner than coal. And some people say it's worse in terms of its climate impacts. And I'm sure some of you are hearing about renewable natural gas because the natural gas companies are advertising this like crazy. It's a greenwashing marketing scam, really. I mean, there is a role for renewable natural gas in our future, but the idea that we'll be pumping this into our homes and just living our lives the way we are, burning, methane or propane in our homes that comes from renewable sources is just a joke. Literally, there is just not near enough of it. For one, the most optimistic estimates say that there's 15% available, but that includes with technology that doesn't exist today and sources that are going to be really hard to develop. And it's 2 to 5 times more expensive. So the likelihood that renewable natural gas is going to save us is just a joke. So be very suspicious if you hear the fossil fuels companies advertising that as a reason not to get off their product. So the carbon emissions from propane or methane from a heated home that's heated that way are actually greater than the emissions from an automobile. But the thing is, we just don't see them. We're not as familiar with them. We don't interact with it as much. And part of that is because, with an automobile, every time you go to a gas station, you plug this thing into the pump, you can smell the fuel. You're aware that it comes from, oil fields. You start your car up, you can smell it, you can see the exhaust. So when I tell you that, that car is going to produce 4 to 8 tons of carbon emissions, it's probably like, yeah, it's not that surprising. But your home, it's a similar story, but maybe if you have a propane tank or if you're on natural gas, it's coming from a pipe underground. The flame is in the basement in your furnace somewhere, you hardly see it. The smoke comes out the smokestack of your home, you don't smell it or interact with it, but it's actually producing much greater carbon emissions than your automobile if you're heating your home that way. And the big culprits are furnaces. A propane furnace is going to produce 4 to 8 tons of carbon emissions per year, same as a natural gas furnace, and same with a propane water heater, 1 to 3 tons. And so these are the largest sources of carbon emissions in most people's lives that own homes. And so if a ton of carbon emissions is hard to get your brain around, I invite you to think about it this way. So imagine you and I were walking down the street and we came across a pile of garbage where there were 100 plastic bottles and 100 plastic bags and 100 forks and spoons and knives and 100 of those horrible plastic takeout containers and 100 plastic yogurt cups and thousands of straws mixed into this pile of garbage on the street. You'd be up to your knees. You'd be horrified to know that it created 23 pounds of carbon emissions to produce all that plastics waste. But one day of heating your home with propane will produce almost double the amount of carbon emissions from that pile of plastics trash, and 1 gallon of gas more than that pile of plastics trash. So if it helps you to think of plastics trash as kind of like a currency for carbon emissions, I invite you to think that way. And an example of that would be if you're heating your hot water with propane or natural gas, the carbon emissions from heating 1 tub full of hot water is pretty close to the same kind of emissions that we produce from the plastics that would fill your bathtub with plastics trash. So if you can think of it that way, it sort of might ruin your hot bath, but imagine filling your bathtub with plastics trash. And that's kind of the environmental impact you're having with heating your water with propane. All right, so what's the solution? The solution is heat pumps. And heat pumps are a little bit magical. A lot of people don't really understand the way they work. I sort of have a quasi understanding of them, but we don't really need to understand them. I think one of the things that's important to realize is we've had them in our lives throughout. Most of us have had them our whole lives, and your refrigerator is a heat pump. And the way heat pumps work is they move energy from one place to another. That's why they're really efficient. They don't create heat. They don't create cool. In this case, they're moving heat from one place to another. So your refrigerator is literally moving the heat from inside that insulated box into your kitchen. So your kitchen gets slightly warmer. You may notice this if you put your hand behind your refrigerator, you notice the hot air that's coming from there, or sometimes it blows it out from underneath. So essentially, it's just transferring the heat from one place to another. And it's insanely energy efficient. It takes much less energy to move heat than it does to create it. And they're incredibly effective. I mean, last year, before we turned our air conditioning on, we had temperatures in our house that were over 90 degrees, and yet our refrigerator still was making ice. So that's a temperature difference of over 60 degrees. So even though the kitchen is hot, it can still heat the kitchen up and cool what's going on inside your refrigerator. So they're insanely efficient. These same devices can be used to heat our homes and to cool our homes. Air conditioners work in the same way. So basically what a heat pump is it's made up of 2 pieces of equipment, essentially a condenser, or it's often called, that's the outdoor unit that looks a lot like an air conditioner. If you have an air conditioner, it's essentially the same thing. Then there's refrigerant lines that connect it to a air handler that basically replaces a furnace if you have a ducted furnace in your home. And so basically this system can blow either warm air through your ducts to heat your home, or it can the same system can blow cool air to cool your home in the summer. And they're incredibly energy efficient, which we'll talk about. There's other versions that are made up of these two similar outdoor device, but instead of ducts, they're ductless. They're called ductless or mini splits that can be mounted on the wall. And basically these devices are going to be circulating warm or cool air through your home in an incredibly energy efficient manner. These things are insanely effective. It can work in the coldest climates. They're being used in Alaska and Vermont and Norway, in places, Montana, places like that. They don't need to be as efficient in the kind of climates that we have here on the coastal part of the United States. And in southern parts of the country, they're being used all the time. But like I said, the more efficient ones can work even in really cold climates. It is important that the spaces that we're using to heat and cool are well insulated, because a gas furnace produces literally thousands of degrees of temperature. So if you can kind of get away with a poorly insulated space because it's just blasting out insanely high temperatures and using a lot of energy to do that. Heat pumps are more efficient. They operate at lower temperatures. So in a well-insulated space is really important to maintain comfort and energy efficiency. And ducting is one of the things that people often forget about, but leaking uninsulated ducts you can lose 25% of your energy just by having poor duct work. So if you're contemplating doing an upgrade to your home, make sure you talk to people about insulation in your home. That's really important. And ductwork, that's an important thing to consider. But let's talk about cost, because heat pumps are just insanely more energy efficient and therefore much more economical to operate. And we're going to use electric baseboard heating as a starting point, because I imagine a lot of you might be using electric baseboard heating in your area. And so typically a home is going to use in Oregon 30 to 50 million BTUs. And this is the price per million BTUs to heat. So $36 per million BTUs. So you multiply that 30 to 50 and you see that you're going to get a range of $1,000 to $1,800 per year for a typical home to heat their home with electric baseboard heating. Propane, 3 times that cost. Unbelievably expensive. This is an older propane furnace, maybe not so energy efficient, but even a brand new, highly efficient one with well-insulated home and well-insulated ducts, you're talking about twice the cost of electric baseboard heating. Insanely expensive. Natural gas is quite a bit cheaper, but it's not available where you are. This is the option you have for fossil fuels. Now let's look at heat pumps. Another half as much as electric baseboard heating. I'm showing 3 different versions. The ductless one was the one we showed, where the mini splits are those units on the walls. Those are typically incredibly effective and efficient units. You can get even a modestly effective one is going to be about $15 per million BTU. So you can see it's about half the cost of electric baseboard heating. And if you get a cold climate heat pump, these really efficient ones, no electric resistance backup heating or anything, they'll heat your homes down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit when it's that cold outside. Incredibly effective, $300 to $600 a year for heating. So you can see that they're much cheaper to operate. And when it comes to carbon emissions, they blow anything away. Electric baseboard is not bad where you are because your electricity is so clean, but I don't recommend it as a heating source because it's so expensive compared to these other versions. And if you don't have clean electricity, it really is important that you have more efficient devices. But you can see the heat pumps just blow away the natural gas devices in terms of carbon emissions. All right, so heat pump water heater works the same way, except it's all in one unit. There's these evaporator and condenser up top. It's driving that coolant around the tank and heating hot water. Most people don't really care how it works. It's important to know that these devices need quite a bit of space around them, so you can't put them in a small closet. You don't want them in your conditioned space because they will cool your space, but they're great in basements. That's where we have ours. Garages are a good place to put them. They look just like water heaters for all intents and purposes. Most people just care about the fact that they get hot water, and these things will do that and also save you a lot of money. This is what the Energy Star has to say. you'll see anytime you buy a new electric device or any kind of fossil fuel burning device, it'll have one of these energy guide labels on it. And you see that the US government says that it's going to cost you $650 a year to heat your water with propane. Actually, it's double what that in your area, because propane is roughly twice the national average where you are. I'm not sure why that is, but that seems to be the case. So it's more like $1,000 or $1,200 a year for a propane water heater. The best electric resistance water heater is going to be more like $400. Even at those tankless ones, a lot of people think tankless is better, and it's slightly better, but still you're talking about close to $300 compared to $100 for a heat pump water heater per year to heat your water and get all the hot water you need. And in terms of carbon emissions, again, the heat pump is going to blow everything away. All right, so that's why it's so important for people to know about electric heat pumps. They're just unbelievable. They've been used in Asia and places like that for literally 30 years. But around here, most people don't even know about them. So it's important for us to know about them and then embrace them when the time is right in our homes. And by doing that, particularly if you're using fossil fuels for heating, you're going to avoid 5 to 11 tons of carbon emissions per year. All right, the other reasons to do these things is because of indoor air quality. And the more that's learned about gas stoves, and most of the research has been done on methane burning stoves, but it will be similar for propane because the combustion is very similar in terms of byproducts. But there is carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide emissions that come from burning these fossil fuels in our homes. And unless you have a really, really effective exhaust system, and unless you turn it on before you start cooking, and most people forget, and even within the time it takes you to fry an egg, you're going to have indoor air pollution that would be illegal if it was happening outside. And the correlation between gas stoves and asthma, particularly in children, is extremely high. I know a lot of asthmatic people that can tell you when they walk in the house whether there's a gas stove in the house, just because they can feel it immediately. And so these devices are dangerous to our indoor air quality. And we also are learning more and more about how much they actually leak methane, even when we're not using them. So incredibly nasty devices. Induction is unbelievably superior, much better to use. The control and the heating times are literally twice as fast to boil water with an induction stove than with a really high efficient, like high BTU gas stove. They're much easier to clean. You're talking about a sheet of glass compared to all the nooks and crannies with gas stoves. I'm sure all of you are familiar with. They're safer because they stay predominantly cool to the touch. They produce none of these carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide emissions, and less than 1/10 of the carbon emissions where you are in terms of compared to propane. All right, and then anything that you have that burns fossil fuels, whether it's your barbecue or your gas fireplace insert or your gas-powered lawn tools, all these things can be replaced with electric alternatives that work better. They will give you superior air quality. You don't have to refill them. There's virtually no maintenance to these things. You don't need any tune-ups or anything like that, and easier to clean. So electric, whenever you can, replace anything you have with fossil fuels, that burns fossil fuels, with an electric device. And if possible, your aspiration, if you have propane for heating in your home, would be to ditch the tank, get rid of that thing, save yourself thousands of dollars per year in expenses, avoid the propane leaks that are happening in your yard and in your home, and help scale back the gas system, which is a huge part of the climate emissions problem. Okay, so let's talk about transportation. A huge portion of our carbon emissions in the country come from transportation. In the United States, here in Oregon, it's more like 40% of our emissions, not 30. And most of it comes from our cars. A lot of people think about air travel, and yes, that's important, but it's our cars and light trucks that are the majority of emissions. And that's because a gas burning car will produce, like I said before, 4 to 8 tons per year, every year. If it helps you to think about, the equivalent with plastics, imagine every time you fill your gas car up with gasoline that you're stuffing it with plastics waste That's essentially the equivalent in terms of carbon impact. And the alternative is an EV that you charge with clean electricity because you have it there in Brookings, and it will produce close to 0 carbon emissions per year. And costs are plummeting on batteries. We'll talk about charging infrastructures getting better and better all the time. I'll talk a bit more about that. A lot of people say, well, aren't we just trading one problem from another? Instead of burning gasoline, you're burning dirty electricity. This is a study that was done by the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is for average electricity in Oregon, which shows that you would have to be getting over 100 miles per gallon to beat an electric car. And where you are, it's more like 800 miles per gallon because you have so much more clean electricity. The other reason to get excited about EVs is you can go so much farther for the same cost. An EV will go, like, this is a great comparison. This is the Hyundai Kona that makes an electric and a gas version of the same car. For $10 worth of gasoline, you can go 67 miles in the Hyundai Kona. The Hyundai Kona EV, for $10 of electricity, you can go almost 5 times that. So this is why the shipping industry, the transportation industry is interested in EVs, is because it's so much cheaper per mile, which is one of their huge costs. A lot of us have this idea that EVs are expensive, and that's because the sticker price, it's shocking. Over $10,000 more for the EV version of the same car in this comparison. But when you factor in the rebates you get from the federal government and from the state, that's $10,000 off the sticker price right off the bat. Then you look at the 5-year cost of ownership, because what I just showed you, the far less money you're going to spend on gas. Instead of almost $10,000 worth of gas, you're spending $2,000 worth of electricity. Virtually no maintenance. I don't even know what this number is because I've had EVs for over 5 years, and tires and windshield wiper fluid. That's it. That's the maintenance for an EV. But you can see with this comparison, those are numbers from AAA, by the way, that over 5 years is going to be, what is that? $6,000 cheaper or $8,000 cheaper to own the EV than it is to own the gas burning version of the same car. So they're a lot cheaper than you think. Other people also ask me about manufacturing the batteries, and that's a real concern. Like any, production, we need to be concerned about where we get those materials from and where they go. But the Union of Concerned Scientists did an excellent analysis of this as well, and they compared 2 full-size vehicles. And just to build the gas car, it takes about 9 tons of emissions, but that same car is going to produce 93 tons of emissions over its life. The comparable size EV is going to take more emissions to produce because of the battery, because you're basically making a car and the battery. So more like 15 tons to produce the car in the first place. But the average for Oregon is 28 tons of carbon emissions over its 12-year life, 15-year life. Where you guys are, it's more like 1.6 tons of emissions from using it. So you can see that rather than over 100 tons, the life cycle emissions from this full-size car, it's 17 for an EV where you are. So that's why it's just the whole picture around EVs is so much cleaner than gas burning cars. And this is true anywhere you live in the United States, but especially true where we have clean energy. So the other question that a lot of people ask me is, well, shouldn't I hang on to my current car as long as possible? Usually the answer to that question is yes, you should hold on to things like furniture and all these things that took a lot of emissions to produce. We should not replace them too often, clothing, etc. But anything that burns fossil fuels, what you find when you look at it is they produce essentially the same amount of fossil fuels in 1 year of operating it as it took to make the thing in the first place. So because of that, we should be getting rid of our gas burners as soon as possible. Like I said, it's going to emit as much in 1 year of operating as it took to make it. You could be spending your gas money, at least $3,000 per year on the solution, if you have 2 cars, on the solution instead of paying for climate change. Pay for the solution instead of using your money to pay for climate change. And we need people like you to be accelerating the adoption of EVs, because every time one of us buys one, our neighbors see it, other people see it on the road, they go, what's that? And they ask you questions about it. And the more of us that do that, the more, like I said before, it becomes the new normal. So people like us who care about these things should be getting rid of our gas cars immediately. Sell it, let somebody else drive it, and use your money to be funding the solution. There's amazing alternatives out there. They're getting more and more of them all the time. One exciting thing that's really important for you guys to know about, that the new money that's coming from the federal government is being matched by the states. And so there's going to be something like $100 million worth of investment in charging infrastructure in Oregon over the next 5 years, which the government estimates there will be a fast charger, a really fast charger, like a complex of at least 4 of them, charging bays in each one of these charging locations every 50 miles over the next 5 years, and concentrating on Highway 101, Highway 5, 84, 26, 82, and 20. So basically all the major freeways and highways in Oregon will have fast chargers every 50 miles within 5 years. But I can tell you right now, because I've been driving all over the West, it is entirely possible to do that right now, even with the charging infrastructure the way it is. But what they're talking about here is going to make it insanely more convenient and faster. So these things are cheaper than you think. They're way better in performance. Once you've driven one of these, you're never going to go back. And who wants to go to a gas station when you could be charging these right in your own homes? All right, we're not going to spend a lot of time about it, but I think it's important that everyone understands that this whole question of electrification can't just be the people who can afford it. It has to be everyone, whether those are low-income people in cities or in rural areas, or people who just are in danger of being left behind. It's important to realize too that a lot of these low-income and people of color in these neighborhoods are highly impacted by the negative impacts of fossil fuels. They're closer to highways and chemical plants and refineries, construction areas, even agricultural areas where there's a lot more of these harmful byproducts of fossil fuels. People with lower income spend a much, much higher percentage of their income for energy. Imagine if you're a low-income family and you're having to pay those propane bills in a home that you rent. Imagine that. And you have no ability to even change the energy system. You're being forced essentially to pay those high costs. That's something where we need policy to really make sure that these people who are in danger of being left behind are actually prioritized in the energy transition. And it's important for you to know that there's a lot of talk about that and action taking place at the state level to make sure that that happens. All right, so these are the 4 big ones in your life. If you remember nothing else, remember these 4 things. Talk to all the people you know about this. Like I said, in your case, electricity is clean, but on the average, it's one of the really big ones for most people here in Oregon. Please go to our website if you want more information about this. We have a newsletter that goes out once a month. I would love it if you'd sign up for it. We try not to pester people too much, but we have one that goes out every month. It's full of tips, oftentimes deals and bargains on discounts that you might be interested in, might make sense for you, but also just help you to understand what's happening in Oregon and why it's exciting to be part of this. And then we have these webinars that we do also monthly on all sorts of electrification topics. They're all listed on our website, deep dives on heat pump water heaters and home backup power and all these things that we've talked about briefly tonight. If you want more information, we have webinars on every topic. We'll be doing one on portable heat pumps coming up next month, which I'm really excited about, low-cost solutions to help you get off of gas or expensive electric heating. All right, that's it for me. I want to thank all of you and loved any questions you might have. And yeah.
All right. Thank you, Brian. I think everybody that's on the call can really appreciate why when I heard Brian's presentation the first time, I was hooked and I had to do whatever I could to have him give a talk to everybody I could find. So thank you very much, Brian. It gets better each time. To give a sense of Brian's effect, we just purchased an induction stove to replace a propane stove. And so his effect is at the very end saying the effect does go to other people. So I thank you for that. Now we had one question that Marina had asked, but I think you addressed it.
Yeah, but
so let me just
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, it's
I
a
was just gonna
great
read it
question.
in.
The materials,
Yeah.
and I get this question a lot, and I appreciate people asking that. And first of all, I don't want to sweep this under the rug and just be Pollyanna-ish, because there are materials involved in batteries that need to be, they're mined, you know, they're lithium, for example, cobalt, and there are some supply chain issues that are really important. Like we need to make sure we're not destroying the earth by, you know, getting the materials we need for renewables. There's, you know, carbon fiber that goes into wind turbines and all sorts of things. But just as a soundbite, and I heard this from a friend of mine, Saul Griffith, who runs Rewiring America. You might have heard of him. Amazing guy. We have some videos of his on our website, but he did the calculations about how much material is needed per person in an economy that's run by fossil fuels per year. How much material per year versus how much material per year in an economy that's run with renewables. And it's several orders of magnitude less material. So the thing that I think a lot of people don't appreciate, because you think about batteries and we instantly go, what about the materials in those batteries? It's pounds of material. But what most people don't understand is that we individually are consuming thousands and thousands of pounds every year of oil and gas, and all the coal even that's being mined and extracted from the earth. So it's per person, it's something like 10,000 pounds of material every year for a fossil fuels economy versus hundreds of pounds for a renewable energy economy. They're different materials, but it's far less. And the materials that we're going to be using in a renewable economy are recyclable for the most part. So these batteries that we're building, those materials are going to be, one, they're going to have a very long useful life, a lot longer than people think. I mean, Tesla thinks that their cars will drive for 1,000,000 miles. Do you know of an automobile, a gas-powered car that's gone 1,000,000 miles? No. So that the technology is robust, and there's second life for batteries. There's oftentimes what you're seeing right now is that old EV batteries or batteries from Priuses, which are the very first electric batteries that really were out there in any kind of scale, are now being used for things like energy storage for energy grids, where you've got these batteries. Yeah, maybe they don't work as well as they used to, but they'll still store electricity. And we don't care how big they are because they're just sitting somewhere. And so we're using them for other purposes. And that's what we're already starting to see in this kind of renewable energy economy. So I don't want to sweep it under the rug. We have to make sure we're not like, you know, making another new problem, but it's much less material and it's recyclable for the most part.
I suspect that other people have questions. So why don't you unmute yourself if you would like to ask Brian a question. And if we get too many people asking questions, then we'll do a little bit more. But it looks like Marina, you've unmuted. Well, actually, Gina, you unmuted yourself first. Why don't you ask your question?
I always worry about major power outages, and I know that, you know, the local companies here are very quick, relatively, to restore them, but I worry more as the climate gets more extreme, that going entirely electric, which I am right now in this manufactured home, I worry about what will happen. Am I going to lose everything in my fridge, etc.?
Yeah.
Lose heat and all that.
Yeah, that's a good question. A couple of things I would say. Around here, it may be different where you are, but around here, the natural gas companies love to play that card, you know, like the fears of power outages. But the truth is that for the most part, your gas devices don't work in a power outage either. Your furnace has a fan that blows hot air, so it won't work. So your gas furnace is not going to work in a power outage. If you have a gas water heater that has a fan in it, it won't work either. If you have a gas stove that you cook with it will work, but you'd have to open all your windows and stand way far away from that thing, because you'd just be poisoning yourself if you don't have your exhaust hood going when you use it. So even the gas companies recommend you not use your gas furnace during a power outage. So first of all, I just want to like debunk a little bit this myth that's out there. This isn't what you're saying, but it's a myth that's out there that the gas is somehow more resilient than electricity. It's not. But the question of power outages is still a real issue. And there's a couple things I would say about that. One is that there are solutions in terms of battery storage that go from quite cheap, like, I mean, they're not real cheap, but I mean, relatively cheap, like maybe $1,000 for a small battery. I have one. We did a webinar on this, and that small battery that you can get over, Amazon, you can get them on Amazon. It's 1,500 watts. It will run an induction hot plate. It'll run my refrigerator and a air filter system for my home for about 2 days. I can't use all the lights in my house. I can't use the heat pump. I can't cook with my oven or anything like that, but I can keep some of these really essential things going. So it's possible with these little hacks to do that. You can do whole house backup systems, but they're very expensive. Now you're talking about more like $20,000. And I'm kind of like on the fence about whether they're worth it, because it's a lot of money for something that you're probably not going to use very often. They can be good when they're combined with solar panels, but I'm understanding that it's difficult for you guys to get solar installers in your area, so that's problematic. So backup is difficult. The thing that I am most excited about this, though, that I think is ultimately going to be the solution, is that your EV, if you have an EV, you've got essentially a week's worth of energy to run your house sitting in your driveway. So maybe 5 days. So it doesn't work now, but it will be the case in the future that your EV that's plugged into your house will be able to power your house in a power outage. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but some of the automobile manufacturers are already starting to build their cars that way, because the cars have to be built to do that. And then your house has to be set up to do it. And there's code that has to be developed in. So it's a little bit complicated, but it's theoretically entirely possible to do today. So I'm hopeful that one of the best solutions we're going to have to this resiliency thing is our cars, where you've got this huge storage device that's just sitting there. And if the power's out all over the place, where do you go? There's no place to go. People aren't going to work. So your resilience is right there in the parking lot.
And let me chime in one thing. It's sort of in a tangent, but there's the discussion, and Brian showed a picture of offshore windmills, and that's a discussion that's happening here locally. In fact, off Oregon and Mendocino, Northern California, is some of the best wind resources in the world. And the nice thing about it is that when it comes onshore, it is here, as opposed to having to come from the I-5 corridor, coming down from the Bonneville system. So there's a lot of challenges with that, but that is one of the benefits that we can have with having electricity, renewable electricity, coming right into where we are. Just as
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it's important to acknowledge too that there's these things we're talking about, converting to renewable energy. There is a reality that we're going to have windmills in our backyards, and we're going to have solar fields in our backyards. We're going to have electric transmission lines, crossing some of our beautiful mountains. That's a reality. I don't want to, again, sweep that under the rug. And that can be problematic because, nobody wants a high power transmission line in their backyard, but that is something we're going to have to deal with. I mean, the alternative is, gas pipelines in our backyard. That's not any better. So I don't see that there's a way to avoid some of these things. will, wind turbines off the coast of the South Coast, change your views? Yes, they will. We have them all over the place up here in the gorge where I spend a lot of time. After a while, you kind of get used to them, and they have their own beauty in some weird ways. But it is a reality that comes with this. I don't want to, again, sweep that under the rug.
Could I ask, are the electric companies working on hardening their systems to deal with these increased winds and fire and so on that may interrupt our power?
Yes, there's a lot of scrutiny being paid to that. In fact, my son for a while was working with a company that did this aerial imaging stuff, that all they were doing was examining all the miles and miles of transmission lines they had to evaluate them for fire risk. So there's a lot of work being going on in that area. I'm not an expert on it, but I hear kind of secondhand how much attention is being placed on that. There's a good question here in the chat I see about your electric panel, and Carol is saying that she electrified her home in California and only has a 100 amp panel. A lot of older houses, that's typical, 100 amp panel. Newer ones will have a 200 amp panel, and that can be a problem. And so there are some really creative ways to get around this. In fact, I can, if you want, Carol, I can send you some information on this, but there's a company that we work with called Redwood Energy in California has done a lot of work on how to electrify a house on a 100 amp panel, and it is possible to do, but it takes some tricks that a lot of electricians don't know about. So it can be a little bit complicated, but it's entirely possible. The other thing that's happening though is that, and that I'm really hopeful for, is that there is a high likelihood that our laws are going to change. I know this is happening in California, where there will be the ability of the electric companies to say, we will put a new panel in for you for free or at a really highly reduced cost, because we know that you're doing these things like putting in heat pumps and adding EVs and stuff. So your electricity bills are going to go up. So we will recover the cost of this infrastructure charge over the lifetime of electricity payments that you're going to be making as a customer. This mechanism already exists for what they call, it's got line extension allowance. If you build a new house, the cost of connecting your house to the grid is usually absorbed by the electric company. And that's because they know you're going to be paying a lot of future electricity bills. And so that's built into the utility system. So what's being contemplated is changes to those laws. So that same basic mechanism is being used or can be used for these infrastructure upgrades to older homes in particular that need new wiring or new panels in order to take advantage of these electric devices. So it's coming. But for now, you can either spend $4,000 or $5,000 to get a new panel, or there are some tricks you can do to avoid that.
Yeah, well, the electricians I've had that have come out, since I have underground utilities here, so they're saying PG&E is telling them no, to even go up to 125 amps, we're going to need to trench because you got to change the gauge of the wire. And like for 25 more amps, I'm not going to spend $5,000 to change out the panel.
No, it's not worth it. The thing that's cool is there are devices that these smart devices, again, we can have a conversation about this, but like, for example, you can think about it. Do you need to run your dryer and charge your EV at the same time? No. So there are devices that can be built in that basically will shift the load from one place to another. So you don't need as many amps to begin with. But again, these are relatively new things that a lot of electricians aren't aware of and stuff. So it takes a little bit of pushing to get it done sometimes. But we can talk about that if you want. Sure.
Well, the Tesla wall battery, of course, is pretty smart, but that's a $12,000 adventure.
Yes. Yeah.
Marina,
I love this barbecue question. So if you go to our YouTube channel, just Google Electrify now, YouTube, you'll see in the shorts, there's a little like 1 minute video of me with my electric barbecue. I'm an electric barbecue fan. These things are amazing. They're smaller than, you can't get a really big one because they're made to run on 120 and 150, 110 volts. So as a result, in order to get the heat you need, they're typically smaller. They're plenty big enough they're like the size of a typical charcoal barbecue, like a Weber grill. They're almost the exact same profile, but they're not like those huge, propane barbecues that some people have. So they're great. They work just as well. You don't have to fill up the tanks. They're cleaner. They don't get quite as hot, although they can get quite hot, but they generally will cook at slightly lower temperatures, which can be good because you don't burn stuff and charring meat. I don't know how much you're into the health stuff, but it can be really bad for you, the byproducts of charred food. So there's a lot of advantages, and they're cheap. They're, $150 or something like that. I'm a big fan.
Now, Marina had a question that she was patiently waiting. So Marina, why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, I have a couple different things in my mind. I did ask originally about the materials it takes to make the renewable energies, like the wind turbines and the solar and all that stuff. And we talked about the difference in, how much. I got an email that was talking about all that it takes to build some of these renewable energies, like the wind turbines and the solar and all this stuff. And it just came out with these insane numbers. And there was stuff that I knew was false in this email, but it was just one of these things that was sent out randomly. There's no sources or anything that was just explaining, how the path to getting to alternative energies and electric vehicles and all that stuff is jaded, or that it's not as perfect as it sounds like it should be. And it's like, okay, well, sure, there's definitely, some things that we need to fine tune as far as how we're going to get a lot of these materials and taking care of the earth. But I think what I'm mostly concerned about, besides that, is that we have gas prices that we're dealing with right now. And like you were saying, that the electric vehicle fast charging stations and all that are supposed to be increasing and becoming more available over the next 5 years, which sounds really quick. But right now it's like, okay, how do I talk to my friends and like encourage people to just stay on track with switching over to things, with being electric vehicles being affordable. What can the grid handle? Because I keep having this conversation with people about, oh, the grid is going to get overloaded. And I'm like, I don't really think any people really even understand what they're asking when they say this. I think that it's just there's all these different pieces of this puzzle that have to be put together before you can actually start seeing this whole picture. And it just seems like we're missing some pieces. And I'm just wondering what, people can do to talk about it, or to start voting with their dollars or whatever to move these things in the right directions, or where do investments need to be made to make this more accessible and more realistic as far as switching over to EV quicker. So if people start noticing these things, then like, oh, okay, yeah, this is feasible now. We can actually do this, instead of just fighting back saying, oh, we're not ready for it. We're not ready for it. And I just think that's the kind of information that we need.
Yeah,
One of the things, those are good questions.
What's
just gonna say, this is recorded. Because this is recorded, you can have them listen to Brian's talk. So
totally. Okay.
Yeah, you raise a lot of good issues. I mean, one, there's unbelievably tons of misinformation. Like I remember somebody saying, I've heard that, like a solar panel takes more energy to produce than it will ever, it takes more energy to make it than it will ever produce in operation. It's just like, that comes from the fossil fuels industry. I'm sorry to say, that kind of misinformation, that's where it comes from. And that's so far from the truth. I mean, a solar panel will produce hundreds and hundreds of times the energy that it took to make it. And the same is true from a wind turbine. These things, once you make them, they'll generate electricity for years and years and years and years. So it's mythology that is out there, and it comes from either the vested interests like the fossil fuels companies, or people who are just like to find reasons not to do anything. And there's a lot of people like that. I mean, you know, it's easy not to change. It's easier not to change. So I think one of the best things we can do is, when we hear that stuff, is to challenge it and say, you know, I don't know where you're getting your information from, but this is not true. But what works even better than that, I think, because I hate arguing with people. If people don't want to do something, it's like, I don't spend my time with them. I would rather spend my time with people who want to do something but aren't sure what to do. And those are the people where, like Bill said, when he's got a new induction stove and he has friends over for dinner or whatever, and he shows he's probably going to show it off because he likes it so much, because it works so much better than what he has. And so he's going to be an excellent evangelist for it. EV drivers are unbelievable that way, because if anyone knows anyone who drives an EV, they'll talk your ear off about how great they are, because they are. So I think that some of the most powerful things we can do as individuals are embrace those solutions, whatever it is that works for you in your life. And everyone's in a different place. Like, I don't want to like pretend that everyone's just going to go out tomorrow and buy an EV, or go out tomorrow and junk their gas furnace and buy a heat pump. I appreciate that these are financial transactions that, you know, they fit into people's lives at a routine, but they will occur. And so when the time is right to do this, be informed about what's available. When you embrace these new solutions and then you're excited about them, talk to your friends about them. That's one of the most powerful things you can do. The other thing I wanted to say, because I oftentimes forget to say this during the presentation, but it made me think of it just now, is that when it comes to replacing these things, oftentimes the worst time to do it, to replace a water heater or a furnace or even a car, if you're thinking you want one of these electric devices that's part of the solution, if you wait till your current one breaks, you're likely to suffer unduly, because it can take some time between when you decide you want a heat pump water heater, for example. It might take you 3 or 4 weeks to get it installed. So if you wait till your gas water heater, your propane water heater breaks before you wait for that to happen, you're likely to be out of hot water for several weeks. So then the same is true with your furnace. You might have it might take you a couple of weeks to get your furnace replaced. So what I advise people to do is to, at some point, you know, take stock of the things you have in your home and how old they are. Try to figure that out. And if your water heater is more than 8 or 10 years old, you should like just budget to fix it and replace it sometime in the next year or two. If your furnace is more than 12 or 15 years old, it's not working very well, one, most likely, and two, it's likely to need a replacement. And you know, electric resistance, like baseboard heating, that doesn't break. So it's more like, you know, when you have the budget to do it. And same with a car, you know, you might be on a wait list to get the kind of EV you want. So if you wait till your current one breaks, or, you know what I mean? So I just put it out there. It's best to plan for these things, because they're not fun. Nobody likes buying a new thing like that, but you'll be happy once you did it. I don't know if I answered all your questions, Brina, because you had a bunch of them in there, but I think what I can tell you, that there's a lot of action happening at the state legislative level around these exact things. I talked a little bit about infrastructure. There's tons of money going into infrastructure. And I've been reassured from everyone I know who's close to it that Oregon has a really good plan for how they're going to do this. There's money going into electrification of homes, low-income homes in rural areas, and to help people get off of wood and propane and onto these lower cost heating solutions. So it is happening, but you know, it's never fast enough. So it's frustrating.
Okay. Yeah, you answered a lot, actually. I mostly was just curious from now or from here, if there's any resources like that I can go look at, like online, as far as state legislature and whatever things are happening so I can be aware and like have that information to back myself up. I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
I'm having these arguments with people.
Yeah.
I just don't know like where to even look for this type of information, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of information on our website. We have a good FAQ section that might have a lot of the same questions that you're talking about.
Okay.
And then in terms of legislation, a good place to, if you can, there's a place called an organization we do a lot of work with called Climate Solutions. They're a good source. Actually, SOCAN has some pretty good information. Bill, don't they, on legislative priorities and things?
They do. Yep.
So
Okay.
that could be another good resource.
Climatesolutions.com.
Yep. And then, so is it just socan.org? Is that the website?
No, it's actually socan.eco, E-C-O.
Mhm.
Okay.
Simple.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
And
another
that, as a
one.
matter of fact, as I mentioned about the recording, in probably several days, we'll have the recording of that Brian's talk posted there. So, you can refer to people to that as a resource.
Okay. That's
Brian,
helpful.
I was stolen almost about an hour and a quarter of your time, and we do have people here that are renters and not in a position to put solar on their house. Don't do that, but there is options for community solar. Do you have any thoughts about that or any ideas?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of community solar. I mean, the program that I'm aware of is the statewide Oregon program is only pertains to people who are PGE or Pacific Power customers. But there are more one-off type programs that happen at a local level that can be, basically cobbled together, so to speak. And oftentimes they take the form of solar panels going on a church or a school, perhaps, and then sometimes the whole community can be off-takers of that installation. But anyone who's a PG or a Pacific Power customer, there's information on our website about how to sign up for that. It's a breeze. You'll save 5% on your electric costs and you'll be getting 100% renewable energy. It's like win-win-win. It produces new clean energy jobs in the area. It's all good. It's like one of the best programs in the country for being able to quickly get renewable energy. So if any of you have, maybe you're not a PG or a Pacific Power customer, but if you have friends who are, I would highly encourage them to investigate that. There's really good information on our website. On our page, we have a page here. Let me share my screen really quickly with you, just to give you a sense of what this looks like. Our website looks like this, the landing page. But if you go to this section is take action and discounts. It's organized by these different actions. Like if you want to sign up for a green power plan or sign up for community solar and you click on this, it'll give you all the information on how you do it. It's very orchestrated towards the sort of Portland metro area, unfortunately. So some of the resources here are only going to be relevant for the Portland area. But some of them, like, if you want a fireplace insert, there's a discount here that's a national thing. You get 15% off of a electric fireplace insert that they'll ship to your house. So there's things that are worth considering here. There's EV things here also that are not just the Portland area. But this is a good resource. So check that out. The other thing I would say about renters, because renters, I get it, it's a big problem. A couple of things I would point out. We're going to end up doing a webinar just on this topic, but we're doing one next month in June I mentioned on portable heat pumps. These things are amazing. They're the size of a suitcase, and they have a hose that you stick out the window, and it will heat a good sized space. Even a lot of people are used, if your home is well insulated. I have people who are heating their 1,500 square foot homes just with one of these units, and they also provide air conditioning. So it can be a great way to use less electric baseboard heating or less propane or gas heating. and put it in the space that you use most often, and cut your heating bills way, way down, because they use about a third of the electricity that electric baseboard heats does. So that's a great solution. Little induction hot plates, you're getting a whole new stove, but you can get a hot plate, a single burner induction hot plate for about $65 on Amazon, and avoid using your gas stove as much as possible. So those are kind of good sort of hacks, I call them, for particularly useful for renters, where you're not going to buy a new stove because the stove doesn't belong to you, but you don't have to use it. You can use this induction hot plate instead, because think about it, most of the time we're using a single burner when we make a meal. So you can at least dramatically reduce your amount of energy you're using from these less favorable sources.
Great. Any other questions?
Thanks for your information.
You're welcome, Rena.
I have a quick one. I guess, how do you sign up for your newsletter? And the second one is, what do you think of the Blue Sky program for Pacific Power? I've been paying extra for that for years, and I'm just wondering if you've heard of it and what you think of it.
Yeah. Well, on your first question, if you go to our website, you'll get this little pop-up thing that says, please sign up for our newsletter, and just type your email address in there and push subscribe, and you'll be on our list.
Okay.
So that's easy. Regarding the Blue Sky, I'm a fan of those programs. I'm a PGE customer, and the equivalent is called the Green Future program. And so I use that. But here, on our website, this is how to sign up for the Pacific Power one. I recommend people do it. But if you're a Pacific Power customer, the much better solution is community solar. And again, on our website, we have the steps on how you do that. If you go to this sign up for community solar, there's a little video on how it works, because it can be a little confusing. Like, what does it really mean? This video explains it really well. And then here are 3 providers. I'm a big fan of Common Energy. I've done a lot of work with all of these suppliers, so I know them. I know these people really well. They're all good, but Common Energy is just the easiest one to subscribe to, and they're the ones that have the most programs. Oregon Shines, I have a program through Oregon Shines here for my home, but it's pretty easy to do, but Common Energy makes it easier than most. So I kind of point people there. But these things are great because, like I said, you're guaranteed to save 5%. So rather than spending extra, like you're doing with the Blue Sky plan, you'd be saving 5% on your energy bill. What I advise people to do is to do both. So stay enrolled with your Blue Sky plan, but enroll in a community solar program. They're being built right now, so it might be months before it actually goes live, but you can sign up for it today. And the way that the community solar programs work is they will typically only supply 85 to 90% of your expected use, because they don't want you to buy too much from them. So that means there will be a little gap between the renewable energy you get from your community solar program and what you actually consume every month. And so the Blue Sky plan will cover that difference. So you've got 100% renewables coming from community solar, a little bit of gap that you cover with your Blue Sky plan, and now you'll be spending like a few cents a month extra, maybe $1 a month for Blue Sky, but you're saving maybe $20 a month or something like that from your community solar. So that's a really good way to go. And you can even have solar panels and do those other things. That's what we have here. We have a small solar system, a community solar program, and the green. We do all 3 at the same time. And so they can all work together. But I'm a huge fan of community solar. It is one of the best things. I really want it to be successful. It already is, but the more people that sign up, it means the more of these things are going to get built. So it's really important for us to support them.
What's your
Bozak. Go ahead, Chuck, finish your question. Go ahead. Chuck, go ahead.
So I was just wondering what your website, I want to sign up for your newsletter. How do I do that? What's the easiest way to go at it?
Yeah, if you just go to electrifynow.net.
Okay, electrifynow.net.
And then once you, it will, when you go onto our website, you'll get a little pop-up thing that will ask you if you want to subscribe, or go to, the other way you can do it is go to, if you don't see that, go to the about page or the contact page, and you'll get another opportunity there. And if you have trouble, email me. Like, let me put my email in the chat here. If anybody has, oh man, I gotta spell it correctly though. If anybody has questions about any of this stuff, or if you have trouble finding information you're looking for, feel free to email me. I would love to help people out, so don't be bashful.
And Tom Bozak, it looked like you had unmuted yourself. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, kind of a comment and a question. Just wanted to mention that Coos Curry has been excellent in encouraging people to become, energy efficient and green. And they've done it at least in a couple of ways that I'm aware of. And for EV owners who charge at home using 220 at level 2 charging, they offer a $15 a month rebate if you charge during the low demand period between, I think it's 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. And also, they had a program where you could purchase a heat pump water heater for about a third the price. And we took advantage of it, but apparently very few people did. And hopefully they'll do that again and get the word out there, because it's a great deal and we save a lot of money on it. Our water heating bill is about $50 a year, which is a fraction of what it would be for even a regular water heater, especially for gas. And another comment, we have 2 EVs, and there's an issue in rural areas in EVs because a lot of the rural car dealers don't support electric vehicles. I bought both of our vehicles from our local dealer in Brookings, and they got rid of the franchise for General Motors, which are the 2 electric vehicles that we bought, and they won't maintain them. So we have to take them, if in this case where they need maintenance, which, like you said, is very rare, we have to take them out of town at least 2 hours away. So that's a problem. I don't know that anything can be done about it, but it's a barrier to EV adoption in areas like this.
Yeah, no, those are good points. First of all, on the time of use stuff, I mean, I'm a huge fan of those things, and a lot of what's exciting about these electric options, even electric heat pump water heaters, is the new standards, the new ones that are being built. They have to come with this capability of communicating with the internet. So there is a possibility that you can sign up to have your water heater. Essentially, the electric utility can say, oh, we've got a huge peak event coming up because it's hot, so everyone's going to be running their air conditioners. So we're going to turn your water heater off for an hour during this peak event. And it will save them from having to create all this extra energy. So these devices can be used almost like batteries that way, and they can be used to levelize the load. And so what you were talking about with charging your EV at night, it's super smart, because it's like people aren't running their air conditioning then. So it's a good time to be using this electricity we already have. So I love that Coos Curry is doing that. And that's really cool. I also think it's there's a lot of utility companies around the state that have been offering discounts on heat pump water heaters because it's a way for them to reduce the amount of electricity they have to generate. So instead of them having to purchase more or find more capacity, they can actually serve more customers with the same amount of electricity by doing these efficiency measures. So it's really smart. There is on our website, if you go to the install a heat pump water heater tab, there is still a statewide deal on heat pump water heaters. That's a really good deal. It's almost a 50% discount on the device, and they'll ship it to your door. But then you have to find an installer to put it in. And that can be a problem. I don't know what you experienced in your area, but it can be hard to find a plumber that will do it because some of them aren't familiar with the technology or whatever. I know I had trouble with that when I first put mine in, but so that's one of the things that I'm a fan of for a lot of these things that you're talking about is kind of like local electrification, almost like clubs. I was really helpful in getting Ashland they have one called Electrify Ashland now, and they have their own website. And what they're really trying to do is figure out how to help, how the community can help each other to do these things by sharing information, sharing resources. And in some cases, we've been able to like I managed to get some discounts from manufacturers for them for installation of heat pumps and that sort of thing. So it's possible to do this, organize it at a local level. And then that conversation about, okay, how do we entice a dealer to like, figure out how to provide EV service here. You have more clout when you have an organization like that, that's sort of citizen led. So I'm a big fan. I'll do everything I can to help you if you decide you want to do something like that, but it takes organization power.
That's interesting. There are a lot of EVs in this area, and that it's disappointing that our dealer decided that it wasn't worth their effort.
That is disappointing.
I think maybe Tesla people have an advantage because they have mobile service. They'll come to you, which is something that most brands don't have.
Yeah. It's true.
Well, one of the things I enjoy about hosting these is to get good discussions going. One of the worst things is I then have to cut them off. But I hope, we got 15 people that joined in, which is a good turnout for Brookings, which is really nice. But we did get people from well outside of our area. So it says something about what you were able to provide, Brian. And I think that everybody will echo that it was a fantastic hour and a half, a lot of information.
Well, thank you all for hanging in there. I know it can be a lot to absorb, but I love talking about this stuff. So, and I really offer it sincerely. If you have specific questions, if I can't answer them, I can usually find someone who can. So let me know.
Well, I think you can be well aware that this is one of the best presentations we've had. So I thank you very much. And I think I will let you go. Have your evening.
All right. Good night, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Yeah.
Very